Hello guys, welcome back to People, Power and Politics. In this episode, I'm starting a new series. We explore some of the most influential political ideology in world history and the historical landscape that led to their emergence. By the time you finish this series, you have a basic understanding of major political ideologies. The first ideology we'll be discussing is socialism. Most people already know the basic idea that socialism is centered around equality. But in today's video, we'll go beyond that and explore how socialism first emerged and its core ideas. Before we talk about socialism, we need to understand the historical context in which socialist ideas first appeared. This was during the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century. Europe experienced the Industrial Revolution. As industry expanded, factories and cities grew rapidly. At the same time, a new social class emerged. This is called the capital class, often referred to as the bourgeoisie or factory owners and business elites. Even before the Industrial Revolution under the feudal system, there had already been social division between landowners and peasants. However, during the Industrial Revolution, the gap between capitalists and workers became much larger. As factory owners became increasingly wealthy, workers often found themselves trapped in poverty. Many work up to 16 hours a day in dangerous factories and mines, receiving only small wages in return. This economic system is known as capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which markets are no longer controlled directly by kings, rulers, or governments. Instead, individuals are free to own businesses and compete with one another in an open market. Capitalism brought many positive developments, including innovation, industrial growth, technological advancement, and entrepreneurship. But it also had a darker side. When wealthy capitalists accumulated more and more wealth, workers often faced worsening conditions and growing hardship. As the gap between rich and poor continued to widen, many people became dissatisfied with the growing inequality within society. They began searching for an alternative political and economic system that could challenge capitalism and the dominance of the wealthy bourgeoisie. People started asking important questions. Could there be a better way to organize society? Is there a system that would be fairer to everyone? It was from these questions and discussions that the idea of socialism was born. Because socialism emerged largely as a response to capitalism, it is not only a political ideology but also an economic philosophy. Mainly, socialism consists of three main principles. 1. Equality. 2. Collective ownership. And 3. Collective action. According to socialist thinking, factories, land, and other major resources should not be controlled solely by a small wealthy elite. Instead, they should be collectively or publicly owned for the benefit of the society as a whole. So for this reason, socialists generally seek to eliminate or at least reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. They also believe that essential services such as education, healthcare should be accessible to everyone. Socialists advocate for stronger worker rights and argue that workers should have a voice in economic decision-making. Rather than leaving all economic decisions in the hand of a wealthy business owner, workers should also have a role in shaping the economy. So now, let's talk about the three important figures who helped lay the foundation of socialist thought. We call founding fathers of socialism. The first one is Henri de Saint-Simon. Saint-Simon believed that society should be led by technocrats. This meant scientists, engineers, industrial managers, and other skilled specialists should guide society rather than the kings, aristocrats, or wealthy elites. He also argued that the society should reward people based on their contributions and efforts. The second thinker is Karl Marx. He strongly advocated social equality. He believed that people should live together in harmony and oppose all forms of oppressions. According to him, people should work together and share ownership collectively. He also promoted gender equality and women's rights, making him one of the early voices supporting women's liberation. One of his famous ideas was that people should be allowed to do work they genuinely enjoy. He believed that workers should be organized around human happiness rather than forced obligation. The third figure is Robert Owen. Unlike the previous two thinkers, Owen was not a philosopher or writer, he was a wealthy factory owner. Despite being a capitalist himself, he actively worked to improve the lives of workers. He reduced working hours, ended child labor in his factories, provided housing for workers, and established schools for workers and their children. He also opened affordable stores that sold goods at reasonable price to help workers meet their daily needs. In many ways, he implemented some of the earliest forms of social welfare programs. Moreover, Owen became an advocate for worker rights and campaigned for labor laws and factory regulations in England. These individuals planted the seeds of socialism, but larger generations often labeled them as utopian socialists, suggesting that their ideas were idealistic and difficult to achieve in practice. As socialist ideas continue to develop, a major turning point arrived in 1848 with the publication of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This document is one of the most influential political writings in history. Despite its enormous impact, the Communist Manifesto was actually a very short publication. It was more like a political pamphlet than a full-length book because it only consists about 23 pages. The central argument of the manifesto was that the human history is essentially a history of class struggle. According to Marx and Engels, throughout the history, there have always been conflicts between those who hold power and those who are oppressed. In earlier eras, it was the struggle between the kings, nobles, and peasants. In the industrial age, it became the struggle between the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and the proletariat or working class. They argued that workers should rise up and carry out a revolution against capitalism. By overthrowing the capitalist system, they believed workers could establish a new socialist society. But Marx and Engels did not see socialism as the final destination. Their ultimate goal was the creation of a communist society, a society where social classes without exploitation and eventually even without the need for a state. In their theory, society would first move from capitalism to socialism, then over time, socialism would evolve into communism. Whether agree with Marx or not, the Communist Manifesto significantly strengthened socialists throughout the world. Socialist ideas were no longer viewed merely as idealistic dreams. Instead, they began to be seen as a more systematic and theoretically grounded framework, often referred to as scientific socialism. Let's look at some real-world examples of how socialist ideas were put into practice. Because socialism developed through the ideas of many different thinkers, there has never been a single universally accepted blueprint for what a socialist society should look like. As a result, countries that adopted socialist ideas often implemented them in a very different ways. One of the most significant examples came in 1917 when the Russian Revolution took place. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, came to power and established the Soviet Union. Supporters viewed this as a historic victory for the working class. This model is often referred as a revolutionary socialist because it got the socialism through revolution rather than through elections or gradual reform. The Soviet Union became the first country to attempt implementing Marxist ideas on a national scale. Factories were nationalized and brought under state ownership. Large estates were confiscated from landowners and redistributed. Most major economic activities became state-owned or publicly owned rather than privately controlled. According to Marx's theory, socialist society would eventually develop into a classless communist society. But in practice, things became differently. Instead of gradually eliminating state power, the Soviet Union developed into a highly centralized and authoritarian system. Political power became concentrated in the hands of the communist parties and the opposition groups were suppressed. Under Joseph Stalin, government control became even more extensive. Political repression increased, censorship became widespread, citizens were closely monitored, and forced labor systems were expanded. However, the Soviet Union remained an inspiration for many socialist revolutionaries around the world. Before the Soviet experiment, socialism had existed mainly as a set of ideas. The Soviet Union was the first major attempt to put those ideas into practice. As a result, reactions were mixed. Some people look at the Soviet experience and concluded that socialism led to authoritarianism. Others argue that Lenin and Stalin had betrayed the original idea of socialism, and the Soviet Union did not truly represent what socialism was supposed to become. So now let's go to another practice. Countries such as Sweden, Norway, and Finland were also influenced by socialist ideas. Unlike the Soviet Union, they did not pursue violent revolution. Instead, they attempt to build a more equal society through democratic practice. This approach is commonly known as democratic socialism. Democratic socialists generally support many traditional socialist goals, such as reducing economic inequality, protecting worker rights, and ensuring that key sectors of society serve the public interest. The difference is they seek to achieve these goals through multi-party democracy, free elections, and constitutional government, rather than through revolution. These countries are often described as welfare states because they place a strong emphasis on public well-being. In many of these countries, education and healthcare services are heavily subsidized or free. Tax revenue is used to provide public services that benefit society as a whole. In some cases, even university education is offered at little or no cost. Workers enjoy strong labor protections, and people who lost their job often receive unemployment benefits and other forms of social support. Labor unions also tend to play an important role in these societies. As an interesting side note, in June 2026, Zoran Mandani gained significant attention after winning the mayor position of New York City while openly saying himself as a democratic socialist. His campaign attracted considerable support from younger voters and generated substantial discussion on social media. So let's talk about another model. It is social democracy. This approach is especially common in countries such as France, Germany, and Netherlands. Like democratic socialism, social democracy combines democratic governance with social welfare principles. However, social democracy generally accepts capitalism to a much greater extent. That means private businesses remain privately owned and are allowed to compete in the market. The government does not seek to nationalize most industries. At the same time, governments regulate markets to prevent excessive inequality and protect workers and consumers. Social democratic countries also maintain strong welfare systems, including public healthcare, education, pensions, and social welfare programs. One interesting feature of these countries is their use of progressive taxation, where individuals and larger businesses typically pay higher tax rates, while ordinary citizens often pay less. This helps reduce extreme income inequality while still allowing market competition and economic growth. When comparing these three models, revolutionary socialism, democratic socialism, and social democracy, the Soviet model clearly stands apart. the latter two models often look quite similar in practice. Although political theorists distinguish between democratic socialism and social democracy, real-world policies frequently overlap. In fact, many people casually group them together under the broader label of social democracy. When we examine these examples, an important lesson becomes clear. All of them were inspired in one way or another by socialist ideas, but the outcomes were dramatically different. The Soviet Union became an authoritarian one-party state and eventually collapsed. Meanwhile, many European countries, influenced by socialist principles, became prosperous, stable, and widely admired. This suggests that the success or the failure of a political ideology often depends not only on the ideology itself, but also on how it is implemented in practice. Supporters of socialism have their arguments. Critics of socialism have theirs also. Both sides can point to historical examples that support their positions. So, in this era, 21st century, technological development and globalization have transformed the world in ways that previous generations could hardly imagine. Many modern challenges are no longer confined within national borders. They became global problems that affect everyone. For example, issues such as climate change, environmental degradation, and pandemics like COVID-19 require international cooperation rather than solutions from individual countries acting alone. Because of this, some people argue that a system focused primarily on profit, capitalism, is not always capable of addressing these collective changes effectively. For example, many believe it is unfair that industrialized countries can emit large amounts of greenhouse gases while the consequences of global warming are experienced by people all over the world. Others point to global economic inequalities. Many poorer countries mainly export raw materials and natural resources, while wealthier countries manufacture high-value products and gain most of the profits. These kinds of concerns have contributed to renewed criticisms of capitalism. For example, one could compare a powerful industrial economy to the capitalist class, while a resource-exporting developing country may resemble the working class within that relationship. Because of these issues, interest in socialist ideas has been growing again among many young people around the world. More than 200 years after its origin, socialism remains one of the most influential and controversial political ideologies ever created. So, do you think will socialist ideas continue to gain momentum in the future, or will they gradually fade away? What do you think? For sure, no one knows. What is certain is that socialism remains as a major force in political debates around the world, and its future will continue to be something worth watching. Guys, thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.